Hello, everybody. We've got about 60, just over 60 people through the door now. This is when we would all be milling around and waving at our friends and haven't seen you in a while, introducing ourselves. We've got someone from Toronto here. Hi. Okay, it looks like we're making our way over to Facebook. And people are still flowing in. Hello. Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm getting close to 70 people now. And just a friendly reminder that nativeland.ca is just a good starting point for learning out whose land you're on. It is not the definitive answer with all of the correct information. That website is not maintained, to my knowledge, by an Indigenous person. So please just use that as a place to start your learning. That is not where your learning ends. We are about up to 70, there's some good introductions going on in the chat there. Feel free to pop in. And thanks, Trudy. Reminder to social media, hashtag Dare to Run. Another minute here, just as their folks are piling in still. We hit 80. Kristyn's bringing her fans from Toronto.
Oh, that's great.
All right, well, then the participants have seemed to have leveled off here a little bit. It's just about 5 after 5. So, yes, the closed captioner is here. We will get our closed captioning going here in a moment. So while we're waiting for our closed captioning to get sorted, so here's a teachable moment. So Coast Salish is a giant anthropological term that is not our term, and it covers about at least 7 distinct languages and people from about the top of Oregon, up the coast, onto Vancouver Island, through the Gulf Islands, and up the north and into the inland. So if you're doing an acknowledgement, that's who you're acknowledging, and where you're standing is most certainly wasn't occupied by all of those people. So we can let go Coast Salish people and be more accurate and talk about Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, or wherever you might be. So I just want to make sure we get the closed captioning going before we get too much work, because I don't want folks who need that to be missing out on what we're talking about. Okay, we're having some issues with the closed captioning. I don't have a function for closed captioning on my end, so I'm not sure what we're going to do about that. Okay, we're on it. So we will have to get started then so my apologies to people who are in need of that communication, that we are working on getting that sorted out. So my deepest apologies for that. If you leave Zoom and head over to Facebook Live, you'll be able to turn on the auto captioning from Facebook in the meantime, and then come back on over to Zoom once we get that sorted out. So I think that's probably the best workaround we're going to have for that. So where are we? We're going to welcome. So OCMCIA, Ait Nasqualawan Ziquitsnala, Antha Rhiannon, Tlitsna Pumathquam. My dear friends and relatives, my name is Rhiannon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am from Musqueam, and I am coming to you today from the Tsawwassen First Nation lands. And I'm grateful that a lot of you are digging in to and rooting yourself at where you are and whose lands it is you are occupying. And my daughter is just making it home right now from daycare. So that is some good timing. Just a second, babe. So tonight, we are here today. Our event is presented by Women Transforming Cities, sponsored by SFU's Community Engagement Research Initiative, SFU's Van City Office of Community Engagement, SFU Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies, and SFU's Urban Studies Department. This is the first of 3 events in a series where we are exploring how we can ensure our cities work for and represent everyone. The next 2 events are Taking Action in Your City and How We Make Your Vote for Women. Eventbrites for these will be shared in the chat, and we would love to see you there. So now we have a poll. We have a poll that should be popping up. There we go. So the poll will let us know why you're attending this event tonight, and it will help our panelists understand a little bit more about the audience we have here and guide our conversation. A poll should pop up on your screen, and participation is optional. So we're getting some poll results in here. This is really helpful because it is very different doing these webinars when we're so used to being in spaces with people, and when we don't have that opportunity to feel the vibe in the room and get a sense of where everybody's at. So this is very helpful. So we have a few people who are interested in running for office. That's amazing. People here to support people running, some academics, just people interested in general. We're going to move them into maybe the column of interesting to run. And we've got some fans. Our speakers are bringing their fans out. Okay, so we are still working on the closed captioning. I don't have access to the closed captioning feature to assign you as that role. Okay. So I'm going to turn the poll off, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Joyce Masuhara. Did I get that right? We should have probably done that while we were chit-chatting before. The co-chair of Women Transforming Cities, to present the findings of recent research conducted on the systemic barriers to women's participation in local government, and talk about HPP campaign.
Sure, thank you, Rhiannon, and it's Joy Masuhara, but that's fine. So I just wanted to welcome you all from Women Transforming Cities, and really thank you all for being here, especially our wonderful panelists and our moderator Rhiannon. So for those that are unfamiliar with Women Transforming Cities, we are a nonprofit organization founded by co-chair and former city councillor Ellen Woodsworth. And our mission is to transform cities into spaces that work for all people, by empowering self-identified women and girls in all their diversity through community engagement, inclusive policies, and equitable representation. So an important core value is intersectionality, and we strive to apply this lens to all of our work. So special thank yous, of course, go to those departments of SFU that Rhiannon mentioned for co-sponsoring today. We'd also like to acknowledge the support of the Department for Women and Gender Equality, WAGE, who funded the 3-year project we completed this year, which looked at women's participation in local government. This was a project done in partnership with the Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women, whom we also give thanks to and acknowledge today. I'd also like to give a thanks to our staff, in particular Ash Pepler-Ball, who has done a lot of the organizational work for this webinar tonight. So just some background, we had planned a 1-day conference as a conclusion to the project back in March. I don't know if anyone can remember early March, pre-COVID. We saw this really as an ending of the project, but also a beginning. Maybe more accurately, as sort of a renewed continuation of transformation for women in cities. We did decide to cancel just before everything shut down as the pandemic was declared. So now we are here today, starting this series of 3 webinars related to the project. But really, COVID has changed the whole playing field. COVID has shone a spotlight on the inequities and vulnerabilities that already existed in our communities, those that are connected to gender, race, age, class, ability, sexual orientation, due to being Indigenous. And whether the stressor is a pandemic, a climate catastrophe, or an economic crisis, it amplifies the disproportionate effects on women, particularly diverse women and other vulnerable groups. So we're seeing now human rights, including women's rights, are being challenged. And this is in the context of still no country in the world achieving full gender equity, according to UN Women. The potential for huge setbacks in economic gains, sexual and reproductive health rights, etc., are very real. So this is a time for action. And we know everyone is fatigued and stressed, but we also see opportunity and momentum. In some sense, there's renewed energy in the continued demonstrations, the call outs from so many sources for real change, for a better world. So this is the context going into these webinars. Women Transforming Cities wants to come out of these sessions with some collective, collaborative, concrete steps for action and change. There is more urgency now, and we want as many of you as possible to get involved in whatever way you can. Join Women Transforming Cities, if you like, or join other groups that are working for change. Run for office, all those ways in which you can participate. And for those of you who can't right now, we totally understand, and maybe in the future, there will be opportunities, but we thank you for your participation tonight, and we look forward to your ideas. So I just wanted to tell you a bit about the project before we get going. The project focused on women's participation in local government, and others have already examined barriers to women being elected at all levels of government. In fact, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities recently released their report, Run, Win and Lead, toward parity in municipal politics, and details of that report are on their website. We wanted to explore the multiple ways in which women might have impact on making cities better places to live for all. So we examined 4 categories of participation, focusing on the cities of Vancouver and Surrey. And we looked at women participating at the elected level, also as city staff, particularly in leadership positions within the city, at the advisory group level, and in general civic participation. So today we're going to look at the elected level with a focus on diverse women, and we have this dynamite panel to do a deep dive into this area. The next webinar will look at how diverse women can be more successfully involved at the advisory level or in general civic engagement. And the third webinar will look at the electoral structure itself and how it can impede or enhance diverse women's representation. In Canada, right now, women make up about 18% of mayors and 28% of city councillors. These numbers have not changed much over the past 5 years. In Metro Vancouver, where the population is 50% non-white, only 10% of municipal councillors are Indigenous, Black, or people of color. We know that governance bodies that reflect more accurately the population that they are serving will produce more inclusive policy. Diversity inclusion in cities can create more social cohesion and more resilient communities. And this is something I think we need right now. So our project found that in both Vancouver and Surrey, over time, there was a trend towards more women running for office, as well as an increase in women being elected to office. There were also more diverse women candidates, but fewer of them were being elected. For example, there are now 8 of 10 city councillors in Vancouver that are women, and they are all white. So barriers to women's participation can be divided into individual, structural, and systemic barriers. These categories actually are interconnected and affect each other, but it allows for a way of looking at them and perhaps a way of tackling some of them as well. So individual barriers include things like financial resources, self-confidence and knowledge, mentorship and sponsorship, networks and supports. Many of these lacking for women and more so for diverse women. Structural factors are like the electoral system itself, the policies and practices of individual municipalities in terms of things like harassment policies, childcare, parental leave, the structure and time of council meetings, etc. And if there is a party system, which there is in Vancouver and many of the Metro Vancouver municipalities, the party requirements, rules, and policies may also be barriers. Systemic barriers, of course, include all of the isms. So sexism, racism, ageism, homophobia, classism, ableism, to name some of the major ones. So these were all barriers that we found from our project in speaking with diverse women who had run for and or been elected to public office. The literature reviews and other work done by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities also note these barriers, and they come up repeatedly in research. So the recommended actions specific to this category of women's participation from our project are as follows. 1, collect data so that the policies, the strategies can be informed and improvements can be made based on the best available evidence. 2, inform and educate women and improve access to information. And this is one of the pillars of intervention out of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities report as well, and they've actually started a whole resource hub on their website. Electoral reform is the 3rd recommendation, and that's moving to a ward system or proportional representation, which can increase the chances for women and diverse women to be elected. Fair Vote Canada BC has just launched a campaign to make municipal electoral reform an election issue. And remember, we'll be talking about this issue in more detail in our 3rd webinar. The 4th recommendation is for outreach and education strategies to improve voter turnout. And this we found is an important factor, and targeting the groups that are less likely to vote, like youth, and again, collecting data to see if the strategies are effective. So I'll be interested in hearing what our panelists might have to say about some of these recommendations, about their own experiences, what has worked or not worked for them, as well as hearing from our audience. I hope we'll have time to do all of this in our time together. So I'm going to pass it back to Rhiannon to start this discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That was a lot of information for everybody to digest on there. So we are now going to move on and look at that, right on time to the minute. We're going to move on to our questions for the panelists. So I'm not going to read out everybody's bios. Our panelists are all amazing. Their bios are available probably in lots of different places. So Mayor Toni Boot, do you want to just give a wave? It's Toni, okay. And Councillor Kristyn Wong-Tam. And Councillor Nadine Nakagawa. So welcome everybody. I have a few questions to go through with the panelists, and you all should be able to put questions into the Q&A as well. And in those of you following on Facebook, I believe there's people monitoring the chat on Facebook. And if I could just please ask everybody to put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat on Zoom. It just is a little bit easier for me to monitor all of the questions coming in if they're in through the Q&A. And yes, you can only see me right now because the other ones aren't speaking yet. So I guess you didn't see them all wave. So okay, and I also just want to note that Nadine needs to leave us a little bit early this evening because she's got to go and be awesome at her council meeting. So our first question for all of you is, where are you coming from to this conversation today? So Nadine, since you're departing us early, why don't you take a go first at that?
Sure. This is also a question that I'd like to answer. I am a settler on the unceded territory of a number of different nations: the Kakite, the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Kwantlen, the Coquitlam, the Katzie, and even some groups that are better known from the island, like the Zumanis, the Swasin even. We don't actually know whose territory we're on in New Westminster because we've delved so deep into colonialism that we've made these connections invisible. So the city of New Westminster is doing a lot of work to better understand whose territory we're on, whose unceded territory. I identify as a woman of color, as a queer woman. I'm a renter, which is actually very, very rare in local politics, it seems. I'm also a millennial, so I bring all these perspectives to my work at City Council. I'm done, Rhiannon. That was fast.
I know, thanks. Sorry, it's just parenting while changing the world. What can I say? Toni, would you like to answer next there?
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I am currently in Penticton, BC, but that is on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people, which runs from northern Okanagan Valley right down into the United States to their Okanagan Valley. I'm very, very happy to be here and to be sharing the land, or having the Syilx people sharing their land and all of its abundant resources with we settlers. So thank you.
And Kristyn?
Thank you, Rhiannon, and very nice to be here with all of you. I just want to say thank you to Joy, who's left us, but she set us off in such a good way with so much for us to unpack. My name is Kristyn Wong-Tam, and I'm a Toronto City Councillor, and I am joining you tonight from the City of Toronto. This is traditionally the territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Chippewa. Toronto still remains home to many Indigenous communities, and this city is covered by Treaty 13. I represent a very downtown part of the city of Toronto. So for anyone who's ever visited the city, if you've ever been to downtown Toronto, if you've walked through the Eaton Centre or even the Ryerson University campus, or you visited the Gay Village, you are literally in my little patch of Canada, I guess. I myself am a councillor who was elected in 2010. I'm serving my third term. I was the first openly gay woman elected to City Council in Toronto, so that was kind of history making. Although by the time I got elected, they didn't throw me a parade, so there was already someone who was elected as a gay man in 1981, I believe. So that's the short strokes of where I'm coming from. And it's, again, thank you very much. And of course to Women Transforming City for hosting this panel.
Great, thank you very much.
Could I have another moment, please? I forgot to say what I do here. So I was a councillor in 2014 to 2018, and then ran for the mayor's seat. And so now I'm not the mayor of the district of Summerland.
That is worthy of pausing and going back for. So thank you for sharing that. And I really, really appreciate how you demonstrated that that's just what we do, right? We just got to do that. So appreciate you demonstrating that for us. So the next question I have is, what do you think are the challenges and opportunities for Indigenous, Black, and people of color and other diverse women running for an elected office at the city government level? We didn't do any who's going to answer questions first. So if you feel moved, feel free to unmic yourself and then we'll just get started.
Well, I'll get started then. I think that there are some pretty obvious challenges and then maybe some not so obvious challenges depending on where you're at. So any of us that have are a parent or take care of a child or children, there definitely is the child care, but for younger children. But even as they grow older, I think that another challenge that's related to having children, or even if you are caretaking somebody else's child, or if you have a foster child, is that there's a fair bit, and I don't know if this is just because we're women, but there can be a fair bit of guilt in not spending perhaps as much time with your children as you might if you were not serving your community in that other capacity. I know that, and this goes for all women, not necessarily women of color. And there are times, and we all experience this, and we heard just 2 weeks ago that the beloved Dr. Bonnie Henry is experiencing this as well, that people can be pretty unkind, and we can be considered emotional or overly sensitive, those kinds of things, ambitious or opportunistic. All of those descriptors can be laid upon us. I won't speak, well, I guess there's a couple of other things that may not be relevant, just as having children may not be relevant, and that would be if you are having to be the caretaker because it's your choice, or maybe even if it isn't your choice, of an aging parent or an older parent, especially as they move closer to end of life. Or at the same time, you might have a child that has a developmental disability, or a child that's ill. So all of those things are challenges that we as women can experience. And I won't speak about the opportunities because I'd like to hear from the other women first.
Councillor, why don't you go first, just because I know you have a hard cutoff time.
Thank you, that's generous. I think for me, something that really resonates is how gaslighting the world is, and how often I find that myself and people in my social network have to check in with each other and say, am I imagining this? Is this real? And it's this layer of like microaggressions that if you don't, it's like this dog whistle. If you don't hear it, you don't hear it. But once you hear it, you know that that's what it is. So there's been a number of times when I've had to go to colleagues and say, am I blowing this out of proportion? Is this wrong? Even the way that people talk about me versus talk about people, my colleagues on council who are men. It's these, again, I think it's the same thing with racism, that I almost, obviously I don't wish racism, like explicit racism on anybody, but sometimes it's easier to point to. If somebody actually calls you a racist name, you say that's racist and people understand it. But when it's these microaggressions, whether it's, sexism or racism, or, the intersection that, women of color, Indigenous women, disabled women sit at, I think that that's the hardest thing to point at, because often it's like this hard thing to discuss and to say it, you know, to talk about it as a real thing that impacts you and holds you back. I would say for myself, because I was one of the first people of color ever elected in New West, even just wondering if people would elect me with my last name, what it is, you know, worrying that people can't pronounce my last name when I would go to all candidates meetings, etc. Just the way that, yeah, again, people talked about me or introduced me, how much better I had to be than everybody else. You know, I think those are the real barriers of the mayor of New West. I won an award not long before I ran for council, and he came up to me afterwards and was like, whoa, you had to do so much work. I didn't do nearly as much when I ran. I just put my name on a ballot. And I was like, yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. But I think without recognizing that that's the male privilege, that's the white privilege that people experience. But being able to talk about these things, every time I bring it up, I'm divisive, I'm mean, you know, all these things. So I think these are real barriers for people. They're harmful. They take a lot of emotional energy and a lot of energy out of our work in general.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I can only build on it about some of the barriers. And I mean, we know the obvious ones in terms of the stereotypes of cultural barriers, stereotypical barriers, economic barriers, why women don't participate. And I think we're also set up in a way of the first past the post system. The City of Toronto has been recently talking about electoral reforms, especially about moving to a ranked ballot system. So some type of proportional representation, but we're still not there yet. And the first past the post system has always resulted in fewer women elected and fewer diverse candidates elected. So right off the bat, there is a structural barrier set up that eliminates a number of opportunities for women to participate. The other very obvious one and I'll just share a personal story, is that my first election in 2010, I was there were 15 candidates vying for the seat. So it ended up just being a little bit of a dog's breakfast, just because everybody was so brand new and there wasn't an incumbent, which is why there were so many candidates running. And it was really challenging because the election period was 10 months in length. So if you can imagine door knocking for 10 months through 3 different seasons until you actually got to election day. And if you really were a serious candidate, you have to do it full time. And that meant I had to forego any earnings during that 10-month period. You really have to be of a certain, and I burned through all my savings. I actually went into debt to get into elected office because I didn't have 10 months worth of income to sort of store it away. But I found it that, you know, by stretching myself economically thin, by burning through all the energy I possibly could go through, and I was without a child. Now I have a young child, but that's the only way I was able to sort of win a downtown Toronto race. And I think that there are a lot of people, just extraordinary amounts of people, who would never be able to put themselves in that position and go into financial debt or have somebody take care of the child for them for that 10-month period in order for them to catapult into a councillor seat. So it's all those systems that are already set up for barriers that make it so difficult to get women elected. And I'd love to, you know, talk a little bit about opportunities, but the opportunities here I see, and I identify one of them. I'd be interested in hearing what the panelists have to say. One of the biggest opportunities that I believe that is happening is that there's a new group of voters, and they're leveraging social media, and they are agitated as heck and impatient and wanting to get things done. And I do know that some of my older colleagues, some of them who've been there for you know, let's say 20 years and plus, they feel the pressure nipping at their heels, and they know that, you know, time is pretty much up. So that's what gives me hope, not necessarily because we're going to see a massive wave of change coming from the system coming down. What gives me hope is that people are wanting to take political power, and sometimes political power doesn't always have to result in elected office.
That is a perfect segue into our next question, which is, how do you drive change as an elected representative? How are you working with citizens, especially diverse communities, in your municipality and social movements. So like to me, like that question sort of thinks about, it's like, how are you balancing the need to drive change quickly, but also recognizing that you need to keep your seat to keep driving change. So how are you balancing that tension of utilizing the opportunity that you have?
I want to talk about this because I actually have something that Rhiannon said to me. So not long after I was first elected, Rhiannon marched up to me at a conference and said, you know, you're not guaranteed to get reelected, right? So the incumbency doesn't work the same way for you as it does for those old guys. And I was like, oh, no, I didn't know that. Actually, I didn't realize. I thought getting elected the first time, you know, would just be the hardest. So I think a lot of the people who I surround myself with, who are elected at, you know, at the local government table, what we say is that we're here for 4 years and we're going to do what we can. I am not running to be reelected right now. I'm not even thinking about reelection, quite frankly, because if I do that, I will be less brave. I will try and speak more to the people who have historical positions of privilege. And in my community, these are homeowners, these are white people, these are boomers. They talk to us a lot. They tell us what they want and what they need. But if I continue to cater to people who are actually quite comfortable in the grand scheme of things, that's the path to re-election, but that's not the path to the change that I want to see. So I think for me, it's really focusing on like just not thinking about that and using council as a platform to organize. So I identify as a community organizer first and foremost, and it's still trying to like play this inside outside game where I sit at the table, but I also try and be in places that are outside the table, which is I try and associate with radical activists on issues that I want to be involved with. And so I think it's taking that organizing perspective and trying to, reveal the political agency of people who are underrepresented and feel intentionally disenfranchised from all levels of politics. That it serves the people who have all the power and authority, and so I think it's trying to really work in those communities. But it's hard. Oh my gosh, it's so hard. So if the other folks on the panel have any tips, I'm here for them.
Mayor, would you like to go next?
Go ahead, Kristyn, thank you.
Yeah, so how do I try to use my office to bring others in? During my victory speech, you know, the one that you sort of ramble on stage the first time you win, it literally went all over the place. And I remember very clearly saying, you know, so scared now that I'm elected, like, you know, don't leave me alone. Please come with me. And I had to throw the front door, the back door, the side doors, and the windows and the roof open, because I don't think you would actually be serving me well, and I won't be able to do my job well if you leave me in there by myself. And I really feel very strongly that citizens and residents have got to be part of the electoral process, and they have to be part of the political conversation after the electoral process. There is no other way of civic change. After the placards are put away and after the marches are done, the hard work is the committee work. It's the working groups. It's the grind work that just has to drive to outcomes to make laws change. And I know that part is always the piece that sometimes people feel very intimidated by. So everything I do at City Council has been trying to demystify the process. So I do a lot of outreach. We do a lot of public town halls. We let residents speak about the issues that they care about. And my budget town hall, just by way of example, is the most widely attended of any councillor's budget town halls. Usually we get about 150 people. And that's even bigger than the turnout for the City of Toronto. And the City of Toronto has just under 2.9 million people at this point in time. We speak over 140 different languages. And if you can imagine that, you know, this tiny little councillor gets a bigger turnout at my meetings than most of City Council planning meetings and most of the official city sanctioned budget town halls, it largely has a lot to do with the fact that we reach out as much as we can and we engage people and we ask them to participate, but we also try to meet them where they are by using innovative tools like data on the spot for voting just like you used today with the Zoom poll. But we were doing that for a couple of years even before we were meeting virtually online. And then in 2017, I did something very different. I helped create and support an organization called Women Win TO. And literally what we did was we recruited candidates to run for the 2018 election, city election. And out of that process, we recruited about 14 dynamic and progressive women. And I have to say, I wanted to specifically train and recruit progressive women. If you happen to be a socially conservative right-wing woman, go find somebody else to work with you. They were not my interest. I was interested in making sure dynamic young progressive women could run. And out of our slate of candidates, interestingly enough, one ran for mayor. Two of them successfully became members of provincial parliament, and we're very proud of that. A number of them ran for school trustee, and the rest of them ran for city councillors. And so that we had some success. And the biggest thing that we were told that this group of women needed more than anything else was the need to know that they were not alone while they were running for office. So being able to build a network of support and care while we train them on the mechanics of running for a campaign, enabled them to do it with, I would say, they had lots of heart, but probably with more courage.
All done, Kristyn?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. I wanted to, here's a tip. You were asking for tips, Nadine, and I got this tip from from a colleague, also a woman, on the regional district board. And she said, you might want to try reading Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. I'm not sure if you've read that book, but it talks quite a bit about coming from a place of vulnerability. And it's not just for women, it's for men as well. But to, open yourself up, be patient, and use a whole lot of empathy. And it tends to be easier for women to, to have that trait, but not necessarily. It's not something that is just for women. So that was my little tip. And I agree exactly with what you said, Kristyn, just now about making sure that you can maintain as much civic engagement as possible, because we don't have the answers to everything. We as a council or as leaders in the community, it's the community that can come forward with thoughts and ideas that we never may have even thought of. And so I think that what you said there, I think that's really important. So some of the other things that I've been doing here, it's interesting the way the question is phrased, because Kristyn, you come from a very diverse area, not so in the Okanagan Valley in southern interior of British Columbia. It is not very diverse, although over the last 20 or 30 years, it's becoming increasingly diverse. And I can give you an example of that. When I went to school, I grew up in Summerland, and I was the only Black child in Summerland and the only Black child in school until my brother and sister started going to school. They were younger than me. But I grew up in a multiracial family. There were 10 of us, and 9 of us were adopted. So it was kind of a different upbringing anyways. So I was pretty used to diversity just in my own household, but I think that made it even more difficult to understand why, like to go out and there was no representation other than my brother and sister. And I can tell you it was pretty tough growing up in the Okanagan. that hasn't changed, unfortunately. I'm not getting pushed off of the monkey bars and the merry-go-round anymore. I don't get called the N-word anymore, but I get called other things that are just as awful. But, you know, I've said a lot a number of times in the last couple of months that I'm sure you're all familiar with what has been termed the Confederate flag incident in Summerland, and my standing up against racism by destroying the Confederate flags. And I have said so many times to the media and to people that question my conduct that, you know, this is not about me, and it's not about the store owner. This is about a much bigger societal problem, and we all should be appalled by that. And that is something that Toronto Woman, you probably know of Tracy Moore. That is a quote, you know, pretty much from what she has said. This isn't about me or you. This is about society. And so some of the things that I have done, I guess to continue to bring this forward, is we had a pretty good discussion at council and directed staff to look at doing some conversations about racism in our town. And it is my fervent hope that that work will continue. I've taken a leave of absence just now, but that work will continue even while I'm away. And if I resume my duties as the mayor, that will continue, because it's not just that one incident. That incident came from an incident just in that same week of spraying graffiti and throwing rocks through a home in Summerland, as well as graffiti sprayed all over one of the public amenities that we have in our downtown area. So it's really important to me, and I learned this as I was growing up, to stick up for myself, but also to stick up for others that are unable to voice their feelings or their hurt or their position. And you know, I do not regret that, and I will continue to stand up against racism. It's just one thing that you know, it's taken years for me to be comfortable enough to do that, like comfortable in my own skin, and also it was something that I didn't want to really be vocal about until my boys were grown and away from here, because they experienced problems as well, just because their mom is Black. So I've learned a lot in the last couple of months anyways. I've been doing lots of reading about the history of Black Canadians, but also learning more. I'm taking that Indigenous Studies course at University of Calgary, through University of Calgary. And I'm also reading when I have time, so I can do it in bits and pieces. 21 Things You Probably, or you may not know about the Indian Act. It's a fantastic book. But I'm also reading a book called White Fragility, and it speaks to why it is hard for white folks to talk about racism, because I want to understand that. I have seen some quite surprising pushback from people that I considered, friends and supporters, and it's been quite surprising. And so that's an opportunity for me to learn. I support the Toronto-based, what's it called? Stand Up for Racial Justice, that group. I support them financially, and I've attended a couple of their online learning opportunities. And I've also sorry?
I was just going to just do my tactfully best to interrupt you here for a moment.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
just trying to be mindful of the time, and we're going to be losing Nadine. We're going to be losing Nadine in a minute, and I really want to come back to some of those things you're talking about. And there's another question coming up where we can come back to some of those thoughts on that. So if I can just get to one more question for Nadine, and then we can come back to that. Is that okay?
Yes, my apologies. Sorry, Nadine, I'm sorry.
It's all good. We all have lots to say, and this is great. So I just appreciate us all lifting each other up and helping each other out. So thank you very much. Okay, so Nadine, what advice do you have for other Indigenous, Black, and people of color and marginalized self-identified women who are considering running for elected office?
Well, first off, sorry for being so high maintenance here and having to go. I could actually listen to Toni speak all day. When she did the thing with the Confederate flags, I was moved to tears. And also, what an honor to be on a panel with Kristyn Wong-Tam as well, following the work that you're doing on policing in Toronto. I just want to say that I know that every time that we do these things, it costs us. It's painful, we get blowback, and it hurts. And I just want to acknowledge that. Just some admiration from across the country that I see the work you're doing and admire it, and it is inspiring and pushes me to be better. I just want to say that, one of the things I think that's really important to name is that representation isn't enough. It's not enough to get racialized people to the table. It's not enough to get women to the table. It's not enough to get gender minorities or disabled people. If they're going to uphold systems of oppression, and we have seen this, correct me if I'm wrong, Kristyn, but in Toronto with the defunding the police motion that came, the one Black member of Toronto City Council actually voted against the motion, if I'm not incorrect there.
You are correct.
Yeah, I thought so. But I think, we've seen lots of women in positions of power, rip up contracts of racialized workers at HEU, primarily Filipinx and South Asian women. If you're just there and you getting to the table is it, no, that's not enough. And I know that's kind of an unpopular opinion for an organization that wants to talk about representation, because in a sense, representation does matter. People have told me that it matters to see me there, but more than just seeing me there is seeing me be an intersectional feminist and bring that analysis. So again, you are only going if you're going to rip down the systems that oppress all of us, if you are going to be in service to your community, if you're going to be in service to Black and Indigenous communities who are even more oppressed than your own. I'm just sick of the talk about representation, because that's tokenization. So we have to be able to differentiate these things and talk about why it matters to have different voices, their different lived experiences. The other thing I want to say for people, the advice that I would have is that the system is meant to make you feel like you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, you're not ready. That's what it does. That's how power upholds itself. So my advice to people, to myself continuously, is that you are good enough. You do know enough. Every single person on this call could be a city councillor. There's no magic in it. I don't have some secret thing that I do to write a motion or to debate something. I think about it. I talk to people. I listen really deeply to voices that I respect. That's it. That's the job. We can all do it. So just don't let anybody convince you that it is too hard for you, or that you need to go get a master's in political science, or you need to learn this or that. Again, that is them trying to defend their own right to be there and push other people out. I also want to put in a really quick pitch that in January, along with my colleague Trudy Goals, who's on the board of Women Transforming Cities. We're going to be launching a campaign school. And this is going to be a campaign school for underrepresented folks broadly. And we're going to have a stream for candidates and a stream for campaign staff, because we really do need people there supporting other people. I'm right now managing a campaign for a young racialized woman, Tessica Trong. She's incredible. She's brought so many new voices to the table. But truly, it matters that I am a youngish, not as young as her, racialized woman, because we need people who understand that experience and can actually like validate and amplify that. So if you're somebody who wants to support folks, this is also for you. And a lot of it is going to be contemplating what it means to be in a position of power, what it means to wield power. What does power mean to you? For me, it means, again, like better engagement with these communities, ripping down systems of oppression. That's where we have to wield our power and to do it in an ethical way, but it's something we have to contemplate because we don't want to get to the table and just replicate what the people before us has done, because that's led to the death of, you know, so many Indigenous women across the country. Black folks are getting carted by the police, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Poison drug supply, I could go on all day, but it's like, know why you're going there and commit to doing it and to listening to people. So I just really appreciate being here with all of you. If anyone wants to talk to me further, please do. You can get me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, my email, whatever it is. I would love to chat with folks if anyone wants to run, if anyone wants to work on campaigns, if you want to talk about these issues more deeply. I have time for all of you. So much appreciation. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Appreciate your presence here today, even though you've got other obligations today. So thank you for fitting us in during what I'm sure is probably your regular prep time for your meetings. So thank you very much. So I guess we will say farewell to Nadine. Have a good meeting, and we will hear from you again another time, I'm sure. So thanks, Nadine. And I will turn that question over to Kristyn. Did you want to take a chance on the what advice do you have for other Indigenous, Black, and people of color and marginalized self-identified women who are considering running for elected office?
Yeah, I mean, the advice can go a wide range, because I know how difficult it is. It's not just you running; it's you and your family, and everybody who loves and cares for you. I think the first thing that you probably need to do, and I'm a bit of a pragmatist, so I'll just sort of say the first thing you probably need to do is sort of check yourself and ask, why are you doing it? Because that is going to be the question that's going to be asked of you when you go knocking on doors. And you better be able to articulate from your true self on why you're doing it. And it can't be because the other guy who's in office is no good. It has to be, why are you doing it? So you have to answer that question. So that's the first thing is, you know, why are you doing it? And having an honest question and answer period, and extended that to your family and your friends, because if you don't have their support, you know, it's going to be very, very tough. Running for political office is probably one of the toughest things I've ever done in my life. And you're talking, I'm someone who actually left the house of my parents at age 16. I came out of the closet and found myself that same evening without a roof. And I probably was subjected to a lot of things far too early, and I was not prepared for the challenges and tribulation of adult life. And I found running for political office, harder than being a homeless teenager at that time. So making sure your family and your friends are supporting you through that big political journey is step 2, because it is so critical that they're there to hold you and feed you and tell you when you are doing well, and also tell you when you need to improve, and be able to look at you with an honest set of eyes and speak truth. And it's so absolutely important for them to be able to just sort of take care of you when you just had your butt kicked all day, because knocking on doors and asking people who you don't know whether or not they can support you is one of the most humbling experiences you will ever go through. If you aren't even there yet, in terms of, why you should you run, and do you have the support of your family and friends? Go knock on a few doors with candidates. Mayor Booth is taking a little break because she's seeking, I think, another seat. Go and campaign with somebody and get a sense of what it's like to actually go through the mechanics. And don't do just a 1 hour shift on a door knocking exercise. I say go the full 12 hours with them, from the time they stand at a transit stop at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock during rush hour, to the time they're at a grocery store trying to wave people as they're leaving the grocery stores with their bags as you're shoving a pamphlet in their hands. Go that full 8 to 12 hours with a candidate that's running hard, and then ask yourself, are you tired? And now, can you do this with your name on that flyer? And can you now do that for the next 4 to 6 or 10 months, depending on how long your election is? If you can get through that as the first threshold, then we talk about building the arc of a campaign. And I'm very much interested in working with people who are, number one, at that place where they've got these incredible leadership skills, and they want to grow them and scale them. But I'm also really interested in getting women elected, because it's really difficult and very expensive. And I don't want you to just be a person who ran. I'd like you to be a person who has run and won. And those are the kind of folks I really want to work with. And of course, not everyone's going to be the candidate. Sometimes you're going to be the campaign manager. Sometimes you'll be the comms director. Sometimes you'll be, whatever. There's so many different roles. Like there's 25 different roles in a campaign, and you can have any one of them. But every single piece builds up a candidate. And a winning candidate is important, but it's only possible if she has a winning team behind her.
It's true.
That's yeah.
The team around you is very important. Toni, did you want to add to any advice you might have?
Well, I just want to start by echoing what Kristyn just said, and I think we heard a little bit of that from Nadine as well, and that is to make sure that you have outside of your campaign group, so the people that are really helping you with your campaign, it's so important to make sure that you maintain those strong ties with your families and with your friends, because they're the ones that will be there, as Kristyn said, at the end of the day and at the end of the campaign period, whether you are successful or not. And if you're not successful, you probably need them, even more. So I think that that's one thing that's really important. And because we're women, we need to stay alert, and we need to stay vigilant, and just be really aware of, what's going on around us all the time. And I don't want to, creep people out or anything, but I'll give you a great example. Yesterday I was campaigning in an area, and my husband said, who's going out with you today? And I said, well, I think I'll be okay by myself. I'm going to be in a public place outside of a supermarket, in a public place. And he said, nope, I'll go with you. And, when I'm out about town, and it's not so much now, but certainly, in the 4 to 6 weeks after the Confederate flag incident, you don't go anywhere by yourself, either a human or our dog. And our dog is a shepherd. So he's a big dog and quite imposing. Quietly he is he's such a baby, but he knows that what his job would be out there in protecting me. So that's one thing. Stay strong and stay true to yourself. Again, like Kristyn started out her comments with. And social media is, especially in this time of COVID, campaigning now, it's really quite different. We're not doing any door knocking. So that is quite different. But there are lots of trolls on social media, and just, ignore them. Delete them or hide the comments, block them, and just do not engage. If there's anything I've learned in the last 6 years I've been on council, don't engage. Volunteer to meet them or to have a discussion off of Facebook. But don't engage on Facebook. You can never win a debate on social media. And I think that's all I wanted to say about the advice part. Yeah, so back to you, Rhiannon.
It's true. Like the humility and the safety pieces are important. I know in my first campaign, I had an ex who was problematic, and I had an open police file, and I remember he'd been quiet, and then he popped back up again, and then I found his picture, and I just had to be humble and be honest for my own safety. So whenever I went to an all candidates, I sent his picture ahead to the organizers, and like, he's not to be anywhere near me. But it like that, being that humility keeps you safe though too, right? So it's important that we remember about that as well, but because we can still do this work safely. So it doesn't, so if I can be out there campaigning, having where I'm going to be with the problem that I had, there's ways and mechanisms that we can keep ourselves safe. We have to talk about it, and we have to name it, and it's that extra layer of work that we have to do, but it keeps us safe. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And Kristyn, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, with respect to the safety piece, because I think, I don't want to discourage people from running at all, but I think they need to be prepared. And having received death threats, having been followed home on different occasions or stalked, it is very challenging. And the reality is that, as women of color, as a queer woman, I have to take my safety and the safety of my family into even bigger consideration. One of the reasons why I can't live, I just cannot live in a home with a front lawn and a backyard is I feel too close to the ground where I don't have some extra security. So instead, my partner and I live in a building with a security guard. And I know that it was a very conscious decision for myself and her when we chose to move after we had our son. We needed a larger place, and we would have loved to have a place with a backyard. Of course, if you live in Toronto and Vancouver, it's probably the same. You know how expensive it is, and we just couldn't afford probably a proper house anyways. However, it was secondary. Having space for our child to run around free in a backyard was secondary to personal safety, and making sure that we were not going to be that accessible because I have been on the receiving end of violence and threats of violence. Having said that, it should not discourage anyone to run, because you can make modifications, you can create safety plans. And one of the things that you will have to learn as a candidate, as we all have the hard way, is that we should never be on our own. And so for all those budding candidates who think you can do it just because you got a kick-ass website and you may have a best friend who's got, who's amazing at data mining, it's actually going to take more than that. And so when your campaign team comes around you, they need to also think and plan for your safety, and especially if you are a woman. We live in a world of patriarchy, misogyny, and there's a lot of assumptions that you are public fodder for a reason. And unfortunately, as elected officials, or even aspiring to be elected official, we don't have the luxury of punching down, no matter how stupid or bigoted or just absolutely asinine that person is, whoever they are, the trolls, and even if it's a real person on social media. I know Mayor Booth does not have the privilege of punching down, and neither do I. So we always have to rise above the garbage and the hate and the vitriol, no matter how badly we may want to slap down. But we're not permitted to do it because if we do it, we get labeled something different. And that label then stays with us even longer than the B word. And that's because we'll be labeled as difficult or hysterical or uncontrollable. And that stays with women, especially women leaders, even longer. And it doesn't matter how competent you are as a woman leader, if you lose it once, and I think that this has happened to a lot of incredible women, thought leaders and politicians and that lead in many walks of life, they lose it once, it's caught, and that label stays with them for a pretty darn long time. And so the stakes are always higher for us, and so we just have to be, unfortunately, like 10 times better than the rest of them. And especially if you have intersecting identities, the pressure is on in ways that will not be the case for my male white colleagues who walk around freely, and they have this whole bro culture at City Hall, and they don't even know. Even the progressive men have no sense of how privileged they are in the way they move around the world without a care for their personal safety. But that's not us, and that's not for women. We have to be smarter, and we have to be stronger and faster.
It's true. But there are things that we can do. There's other established leaders that we can look for. This great advice that you have all given today. So now, Toni, this is probably going to feed off of what I had to so tactfully cut you off from last time. So our next question is, from your perspective, what is the significance of the moment we are in now, including the Black Lives Matter movement, the increased Indigenous resistance, the pandemic, and how are you building momentum into your own municipality so we don't go back to normal? So, if you want to just carry back on that train of thought there, Toni.
I think we are living in a time of significant momentum, not only in the Black Lives movement, but also with Indigenous rights and truth and reconciliation. As you know, Rhiannon, in British Columbia, we are fortunate enough to be the first province to actually legislate the actions that are in the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. So we're in a great place here, and that is part of the BC recovery plan as we move forward in through the pandemic, assuming, of course, that the government that wrote that recovery plan with many thousands of people, of British Columbians, is actually given another 4-year mandate. But one thing that is, it was so astounding to see on the weekend was the new leader of the Federal Green Party. Not only is she a woman, but she's a Black woman, and she is practices Jewish faith. That is absolutely amazing. And although she has a lot of work ahead of her to do, but I literally was clapping for her as she was giving her acceptance speech, and included right in there the work that needs to be done in at the federal government level, but across Canada, right down to the, I hate to say down, but grassroots, you know, right to the grassroots movements that are gaining strength and gaining their voice, is the work that needs to be done to celebrate the Indigenous people and recognize that we're living on their land and that they have so much in the way of traditional knowledge that we can do so much better here as a country if we start to recognize, you know, if we start moving through the reconciliation process. But I think it's really, really important to get to the truth first. People need to understand what the truth is from Indigenous people on what it has been like and continues to be like to live in, you know, Turtle Island. So I was just applauding her because that, I mean, the Green Party, we think about that with climate action and environmental stewardship and biodiversity, and for her to come out and especially as a woman of color, to come out and speak about the Indigenous piece that we really, really need to get working on. And working, you know, we've started, but there's such a long ways to go. I think that I think that's fantastic. I'm hopeful that things continue in this direction. And Kristyn, you were saying that, I think it was you that was saying that, you know, there's change with the youth that are starting to find their voice, not only on matters of race, but also on matters of the changing climate. And I think that it's important for people to know that creating a more just and equitable society doesn't mean that we are taking away and giving to someone else. It's just leveling and balancing the playing field and recognizing that every single culture that is not your own, from wherever you have come from, contributes incredible value to the communities and the health of communities across Canada. So I think that's good for now, Rhiannon. If I think of something, I'll be back.
Of course, that was great. Yeah, lots. That was amazing. Thank you, Kristyn.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Rhiannon. You know, the issue around racial justice right now, I think in Canada, is reaching a tipping point. But it's happening in certain parts of Canada. I don't think it's happening across the country from coast to coast to coast. And we have to be mindful that, you know, there may be really heated discussions in the coffee shops and on our streets and probably in our civic squares in urban centers. But it's not the same conversation that's happening in rural and smaller communities, perhaps places that are less diverse and probably more homogenous. And so it really differs, I think, from city to city, almost municipal, big city, small city, on how we're having this conversation around, I like to call it racial justice, because I think that's really what we're trying to get to. And in a city like Toronto, where I like to, it's hyper diverse, it's super, super diverse. And so we're oftentimes a city that leans into the conversation of race, but again, only with certain pockets and certain demographics. And there are some places in the city where it's your golf and country club, and you will be walking back into a place whose values are set in 1950s, and the people that go there want it to stay that way. So we can never let our guard down around the type of real social change that we're looking for. And I think that this is where we have a role in government to push that conversation forward, and not just talk about diversity and multiculturalism, but to talk about racial and gender justice. And this is the stuff that really drives me bonkers as an elected official, is because you'll never hear that language, racial justice, in our city hall. No matter how progressive we think as a city we are, because we're not ready, or at least the citizens, some of the citizens might be, but certainly not in the polite chambers. So how we push for that justice to dismantle structural racism, and we know that there is such a thing as systemic racism. But I think that may be readily agreed to by many of the watchers of this panel. But there are a lot of folks who will not even acknowledge systemic racism. It's always about a few bad apples. And if we can just do more training and deal with those bad apples, the rest of the bunch we can keep. And until we change that narrative, and until we start dismantling the systems of oppression, and the bodies of laws and legislature and statutes that uphold the system, we're going to really have a hard time really getting to that the root cause and the outcome. And this is where I think we need to work in partnership. There may be a lot of folks who just say, I don't want to get involved with electoral politics because, who cares? It's the same bunch of people, and I'm not going to vote for them. It doesn't mean anything. Or I really don't like that person all that much because I like that one policy, but I hate everything else. I have now learned in my time in government, and I have to admit, I was probably an impatient youth activist. There's no such thing as a perfect politician. There just isn't. And they're never going to be able to do 100% of everything you want because they're not you. And I am now able to see that, something that I couldn't see as a 20-year-old screaming at my political figure, wanting them to just do it now. And now that I know what I know, I wish that I was able to work with that elected official a little bit better as an angry tween. And I'm not saying you should put down your placard and not keep the fire hot, because you should. But in order for us to affect that change, it means that we're going to all have to get involved. One of the challenges of the defund the police movement, which I have now just observed, is that during the month of June, it was electric hot. Everybody wanted to talk about, reallocating resources from the Toronto Police and putting it into community hands so we can build our own community safety. Fantastic. Well, fast track, 3 months later, I'm looking around wondering where the heck is everybody around the defund the police movement, because we have a body of work that now needs to take place around policing reforms. And everybody who took to the street, the tens of thousands of people who took the street, aren't watching City Hall anymore. And that change is going to take place over a number of years, and it's going to be very difficult for myself and the 7 other councillors who voted for the defund the police to reinvest in community safety, to move that needle any further, because everybody who took us this far seems to have evaporated. So for us to maintain and move political change, we have to be 100% all in. And it can't just because it suits us because we signed a petition at that time. And it may be very difficult to hear that you didn't do enough, but I'm going to say, if you want that change, then we're all going to have to dig deeper, the political representatives, as well as the citizens and residents who are activating for that change, because it's a long journey. The civil rights movement didn't dismantle, segregation and miscegenation laws overnight. It was a long march to freedom, and we have a long ways to go in order for us to deal with the issues of racism, and anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism in this country. So it's never too late.
Yes.
We have a lot of work ahead of
No.
us.
No. And we've been on this call for an hour and a half, and we haven't said white people or white supremacy. So white people and white supremacy. I think that we need to make sure that we're using those words and using that language, so that people are accustomed to hearing that, because we can't dismantle white supremacy without saying white supremacy, and we can't dismantle racism without talking about white people. So I think that we need to make sure that we're always saying those words. I've been saying them for a long time, and I always used to have this massive knot of anxiety when I would go to say white people or white supremacy. But I've said now white people and white supremacy so many times now that I don't have that big giant in my gut anymore, because you'll hear me how many times, and now I'm going to say white people and white supremacy, because it's something that we need to just keep saying, so that we can address and work on it. So do you want to unmute and say it with me? We can say it together. We can say white people and white supremacy. Ready? 1, 2, 3. White people.
White people and white
White
supremacy.
Supremacy.
And
And
enablers
find,
of white supremacy.
and enablers.
Who
Yes.
are not always white.
It's true. It's so true. And I think Nadine had some great words on that about the difference between representation, like just getting representation on, or are the people who are getting in actually going to be working to dismantle these systems? Because you're right 100%, is that it's not just white people who uphold white supremacy. So it's something that we all need to be working on every day. We're losing control of our time here a little bit. So we have a couple more questions that are really great that I don't want to skip over before we go to the question, open up the floor for questions. So we did the advice. Okay, so 2 more questions, and then we'll go to questions from the audience, okay? So the next question is, what do you need from women transforming cities and other social movements to keep you there doing the work?
Are you guys ready to build a Toronto chapter? City to city to city to city to city.
Yes.
I heard a yes in the chat. I see a yes in the chat. No, I'm not joking. I actually think in order for us to build this network of sisterhood, this sort of link, you know, women run for political office, and they start oftentimes at the trustee level and at the councillor and the city council level. And if we can, you know, do what, I mean, Vancouver has 8 women. Did I just hear that correctly? Vancouver has 8 city councillors that are women. That's amazing, because Toronto has 8 women city councillors and we have 26 councillors. So we're at 30% of the threshold. But I know that in order for us to maintain those numbers and to continue to do that work, we should be teaming up with Women Transforming Cities, as well as FCM, which is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and leverage the tools that are there so we can actually scale up and export what I think is doing, what I see is success in Vancouver.
And if I could just add to that, I think that at least in British Columbia, the Union of BC Municipalities, which is like the provincial counterpart to FCM, there was a lot of opportunity this year. Of course, it was all online, but also last year for the folks that wanted to learn more about Indigenous rights and the right to self-govern, those kinds of things. And I think that's really helpful. In terms of how transforming cities can help us with our work, I think that having these kinds of this kind of dialogue is really helpful. I also think, though, and I don't know how this would happen, but, you know, Kristyn just talked about the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and I spoke to the provincial one, at least for British Columbia, the Union of BC Municipalities. But I think a lot of work needs to be done at the local government level as well. So we've got federal and provincial, but local government. And I know that when we started talking about, when our council started talking about, you know, what we can do to move from I am not a racist to I am an anti-racist, huge difference in Summerland, and what counts, how council could be part of that. One of the things that came up was, well, I don't know that we need to really do too much here at the council level, but maybe we could look at a policy for councils, for staff. Well, I think that's a really good thing that needs to be done. But there needs to be learning at the council level as well. And I don't think it should be something that just comes and goes as councils comes and go, but something that should be entrenched in what kind of work you need to do to even go forward and make yourself eligible to be a candidate, even at the local level. I think it's really important, and it's not only important in terms of UNDRIP and the calls to action that are there that impact us as individuals and also as local government, but also understanding the diversity that we have and how the policies that we've been talking about, the systemic policies, impact people that are not white, people that don't have white privilege and are not part of, you know, that are not part of the supreme white race. Another way of saying white supremacy, Rhiannon. So I think that would be really important, but you know, even the pushback that I got, and I got way more support than I got pushback. I should be very clear about that. You know, at times it brought me to tears, and all of the correspondence that we got, with the exception of the stuff that I was asked to send on to the police because it was quite awful and, you know, threatening, was shared with all of council. But even still, there were people on council that did not understand, and it was really disappointing. Not that they didn't understand, because we don't know what we don't know, but it was quite clear that there were people on my council that had no interest in learning or no interest in understanding. And yes, these were men, and yes, they were white men. But, you know, that I think that if we're going to be able to do the work that we need to do in the community, that we have to show ourselves as leaders and model the behavior that we want to see. You know, one councillor even asked me why he can't, why I can call other Black people the N-word and he can't. I know, right? So that kind of level of, and I'm going to use the word ignorance, because he just doesn't understand, but he also didn't care to understand. And that's something that I think that before we can really see movement in the communities that we serve, we need to take on that kind of work ourselves, whether it be for people of color or whether it be for understanding the rights of Indigenous people and what the Indian Act and all of the atrocities actually means. And I say means because it's not a meant. It is still, there's still that trauma. So once again, I've rambled on, but I thought it was important to say that's something that I think we need to have a look at. If transforming cities is able to assist with that learning or that those conversations, to me as an elected official, that would be really helpful. It's not, there's too much emotional labor for me to get really involved in this. But I would welcome any outside assistance in doing that.
Mayor, thank you for sharing that. And Rhiannon, maybe if I can just put in a little plug, because the City of Toronto has a program where we pair women proteges with councillors and women who are leaders within the city corporation. And this program actually came right out of FCM, so Federation of Canadian, no, actually, sorry, it came from the City of Toronto and then it went to FCM. And I know that it's a fairly successful program when a city is able to allocate staff resources to sort of recruit and administer for the, and it doesn't always have to be a young woman paired with a city councillor. It could be a young woman compared to a city manager who may be a woman or deputy city manager, but someone within the corporation of a city that is a leader. The reason I bring that up is because I think it to be a fantastic program. The threshold of gaining access is for the candidates out there who are very interested, who have already demonstrated a level of leadership in their local communities and neighborhood, and now they're ready to take a next step forward. If Women Transforming City could partner with FCM, if they haven't already done so, I suspect you guys are already on it, that would be a great program to bring out, since your reach is so far already into BC, perhaps it's something that every BC municipality does, or as many as possible. And the way I see it in the City of Toronto is that usually when Vancouver does something, we're paying attention. Just like when Toronto does something, Montreal is paying attention. So it could be one of those things where you know, you're already doing this type of work, but moving into a system or into a place that already has this structure in place is that perhaps you can partner up with FCM to do it and scale it and export it. And that would be pretty cool.
Thank you. So I'm not being very colonial this evening and minding the time very well. I just find your answers are so riveting and you have so much wisdom and important things to say that I've been letting the conversation flow. So I'm just trying to be mindful of the time. We've got one more question and there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. So if we could just be mindful of the time, because I know that we probably have a lot of folks on the call here who are up very late or who have tiny humans like mine who are going to start eating all of the veggie crackers, waiting for their dinner. So the next question I have here is, and if you could just try and keep it as succinct as you can, thinking about so here in BC, we're going into municipal elections again in 2022. So what qualities should we be looking for in future candidates, and how should we ask them to run, and what work should we be doing now for 2022?
Rhiannon, I'm going to read what I wrote, and that way I won't ramble on and, you know, go off script. I think that for future candidates, we should look for community-centric women that already are doing work in their community, that they are confident and they are proud of their heritage, cultural heritage, that they are willing to speak out about inaction or inequity. And as far as how should we ask them to run, build a relationship Start by chatting over coffee, get to know them, be open and truthful with your intentions, and learn what supports they need to, one, even consider running, and two, what supports they will need should they be successful. Now, I know that Kristyn talked about, you know, oh, I won, I'm a counselor now. Now what? I'm all alone here. Where did everybody go? Yeah, so I think that all of that's really important. And I think that that work can get started right now. You know, 2022, it seems like a long ways away, but it isn't really. And even though the election's in 2022, the work has to start now.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's important. I know when I got elected, I felt very much alone, and I'm like, where were all of these people during my term? So I'm grateful that that people are getting what I didn't have, because it's really obvious that I needed those things. Kristyn?
Yeah, Rhiannon, you're right, and especially in your first year, right after the election. I would say, you know, for someone like myself who is now in my third term, like I do everything I can to sort of give back. And I think a lot about succession, because I don't think I'll be here forever, and I don't want to be here forever, because quite honestly, it is, there's a lot of personal sacrifice to be made about serving public in public life. So I think a lot about, you know, what can I do to get other women elected, because I think it's so critical to have those voices on council. But it's not good enough for me to just ask, do you want to run for office? I need to open my checkbook. I need to write checks. I need to hold fundraisers. I need to support that candidate. If I said to them, look, if you run, I'm not just going to be here to encourage you to run and cheer you on with pom-poms on the side. I got to be in the race with you. So that means that I have to do all those things that I've just said, but also go door knocking with them. I need to go then open up my now very expansive Rolodex, and I have a database of 45,000 people, and I serve a community of 100,000 people. I need to now turn all my resources and say, how can I help you win? Because it's not just good enough to run and not win, especially if I'm the one that's asking them to give up everything that they know in a sense of safety and normalcy to then serve the public. So that's pretty important for me as someone who is now in a position to help. And I know that there's a lot of other women who never held elected office who are also keen in helping other women win. I have to introduce those women to the young women who are interested in running. And that's what I'd like to do. And I see that as part of my role now.
Great, thank you. So what I think, so organize, and don't leave your candidates hanging once they get elected. You are investing in this person for their term, not just for their election cycle. I think is an important thing to remember as well.
And also to develop a pathway to victory.
Yes.
We should not be naive that you know, you want to see your name on a lawn sign. That's going to get you to victory. You need to know how are you going to win the election, and that's when you need to bring people in to help you with that.
So we have two questions in the Q&A. So what I think I'll do is one specific about Toronto. So I'll target that one for Kristyn, and then the other one I'll have Toni answer. So we'll just do one each, and then that should get us sort of back on time. Okay, so Toni, is there reasons besides racism, sexism, and stereotyping that people still believe Indigenous or Black candidates don't have the ability to run for office, even though they may have received the same level of education compared to other candidates? How do municipal level of governments try to reform and solve these problems nowadays?
Wow, that's a good question. Two questions, I guess. I would say to the first one that the isms that she spoke about, or stereotypes or biases or prejudices, all of that, I think that covers it all. for example, I guess it was the week after the incident, I was introduced as by a radio host who wanted to interview me. I was introduced, and I noticed this as well. You know, Toni Boot, she is the mayor of Summerland. She is the Black mayor of Summerland. She's the first Black mayor of Summerland. She grew up in the community as one of the only Black children in the community. She has her degree in communications, you know, and then the word Black was brought up several times as if, you know, she achieved all of these things in spite of the fact that she's Black. And shortly after that conversation was over, I got an email from someone who sent me on what she had sent to the host, saying, just a minute now. Why couldn't you introduce her like you would have introduced any other guest without mentioning 3 or 4 times that she's Black? Like, why did you do that? And he didn't understand. And she said there were a number of times where I got the feeling she was trying to address that, and you just talked right over her. So the next time he wanted to interview me, I said, not until you apologize for the way that you introduced me last time. And so eventually I did get an apology out of him, but he hasn't asked to interview me again. Let's just put it that way. Because, you know, I just needed to push back against that. So I think in answer to the question, you know, all of those thoughts come from a place of ignorance, whether it is racism or it's, you know, what you have been taught, or what you see in pop culture or hear in pop culture all the time. There's all kinds of stereotypes out there, and I think that all of it comes from that. I don't know what else. I don't know how else to answer that question. I think that it all stems from that. Can you remind me what the second part of that question was?
How do municipal levels of governments try to reform and solve this problem?
Well, I think I spoke to that already when I suggested that there needs to be some work done from the people that are leaders or wanting to be leaders, that there needs to be some homework done and some learning and understanding so that they can model to the community that they are truly allies against racism.
Thanks,
and
Toni.
all the other isms.
Okay, so, yes. Okay, so next question for Kristyn. What are the steps that we in Toronto need to show up for to support and fuel actions needed to defund the police and invest in communities? What does this look like day to day, week to week, year to year?
Thank you for that question. I am so glad it was asked. The City of Toronto is about to embark on a very big fiscal journey through the 2021 budget process. And in short strokes, we are facing a shortfall of $1.5 billion, largely due to the COVID emergency. That's 1.5 B, capital B, billion dollars. The Toronto police budget is $1.22 billion. as of this year alone. And so we're going to need to make some pretty tough decisions in the upcoming council deliberations around our finances of the city on where to snip and trim so we can get to a balanced budget, because cities are not permitted to carry a deficit. So to answer your question of where and when, the opportunity for policing reforms is ongoing. There was just an item on City Council just this past last week where we had a 3-day meeting, and that was about talking about the changes that are coming in the police services as we know it. So there will probably be an opportunity for citizens and residents to be actively engaged by staying in touch. Now, I know it's very difficult because lives are busy. The best way to do it, and I'll be very honest, because I'm tracking this issue, and when I know the deadlines are coming up, I share with you. If you go to my website, Kristyn Wong-Tam, Kristyn Wongtam.ca, and sign up for the newsletter there, I will make sure that you are informed when we send out our weekly e-blast, which sometimes summarizes what is pertinent information that's coming up on council. The other thing you can go do when you're on my website is to go to our link. It's called Process for Progress, and I actually have an entire section on defund, rebalance, and reinvest, all about police budgeting and those dollars. And you can stay informed with us there, because we will tend to be posting all the new information as it becomes available. So that's one piece of it. The second component is that the City of Toronto, through major media outlets as well as their own town hall, will be having a big citywide conversation about the budget. And so that will most likely be announced in December, and then the budget numbers will be released and so forth and so forth. So you can follow that process for at least 6 to 8 weeks until council votes on it in the beginning of February. And that's probably the best way for you to get involved. Know your councillor. If I'm not your councillor, that's no problems, but get to know your councillor and ask them how did they vote and how would you like them to vote. Councillors always pay attention to where the communications are coming from. And if you happen to be a resident of that councillor, then you want to express to your councillor what you would expect of your elected official. And they would welcome it. I assure you, they would welcome it.
Great, thank you. So it's important that people take the responsibility on themselves to continue to stay informed on these important issues. So we're rapidly running out of time here. So before we go back to the speakers, we want to find out a little bit more about who's attending the webinar tonight. So there's going to be 3 poll questions that are going to be popping up. Please, the answering to them is all anonymous. The results will not be shared with the audience, and so good to know. I'll remember not to push that button. And participation is optional. And we're asking because we would like to know who is underrepresented in our events and to allow us to improve our outreach and continue to address barriers to participation. We know there are many more questions we could ask to understand people's identities, but we're just asking the main 3 questions tonight. So the polls should be popping up any moment. There we go. Okay, so thank you. First poll's done. Now we're on to the second poll. These are just really quick. There's just 1 question poll, so they're not going to be up here for very long. And the last poll. Maybe while the poll's on question, the panelists, you should be able to access the Q&A. There's a question in there. You can feel free to type in your answer to that question. Okay. I believe that is the last of the polls. So I'm not clicking the share poll results. I'm going to clear that away. So hard not to push the buttons. Okay, there was one more question that got into the Q&A, so I'm not sure if we have time to get to it. Or the next couple pieces that we have left on the agenda is just some closing remarks. I've got some thank yous and one more exit poll, and I believe our panelists are answering the question. Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so closing remarks. Just a quick quick sentence or two. Any last little bits of something that we didn't get to cover tonight, something that didn't come up in a question, something that we've got. You saw all the poll results about who our audience is. We do have people here who are came tonight specifically for information on how to run. So what is your closing inspiration and motivation, your call to action for the folks that are here tonight? So how about
Here, why don't I take a stab at it? I once saw Hillary Clinton speak in Toronto, and I have to say I really like her. I've always thought she was a brilliant thinker and a strong feminist. And she challenged the women in the audience. There were like 1,500 of us because she was challenged by an NBA WNBA basketball player when she was still a senator, and that basketball player said to her, "Mrs. Clinton, dare to compete," and she then turned that "dare to compete" phrase to the 1,500 women that were in the audience, and she challenged us to compete. So I'd like to leave everybody with that. I guess by paying it forward from a WNBA star, dare to compete, not just dare to run, but dare to run, compete, and win. And we'll see you out there.
great, thank you so much. Toni?
Well, that's a very strong statement, Kristyn. I really like what you just said. I'm not really sure what to say after what you said. So dare to compete, and I guess stay true to yourself, stand strong, and make sure that, and this is something that I always hear this voice in my head anytime I'm running for whatever seat I'm after, and that is to work as if you are losing by one vote, because it's only one vote that can make the difference. And so to just work like that, when you think you've done absolutely everything that you can do and you're exhausted, take that one extra step. Spend another 5 minutes knocking on doors, or another 5 minutes phoning somebody, because you never know. And also remember that the whole work that you're doing as you lead up to the election day is, of course, very, very important. And it's not just you doing the work. As Kristyn said, there's other people that are working on your behalf and doing everything they can to support you and help you win. Ultimately, though, it's getting the people out to vote. Getting out the vote is the most important piece. It doesn't matter how many people you have that have said, "I am voting for you, I am supporting you, you have my vote," etc. If they actually are not able to vote, or do not think that there is a need for them to vote because you have the support that you need, get out the vote, because it only takes one vote. So thank you so much for putting this on. Rhiannon, and Joy. I know that she's gone now. And Kristyn, it's been so nice to meet you virtually. I have met and had very interesting and engaging chats with Nadine before at UBCM's, but it's the first time I've had the privilege of meeting you. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing in the center of the universe.
That's high praise coming from BC. That's high praise.
You have such a big job to do. You know, I am the mayor of a town of about 12,000 people. You know, the work is the same, but having that, just the sheer population makes things that much more difficult. So thank you for representing the city of Toronto and doing the work that you're doing on behalf of people of color throughout Turtle Island. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for those kind words. Thank you.
Toni, I won my seat on the school board by 7 votes. 7 votes. That's how much I won by. 7. And I didn't cross the line. My first election,
460.
I didn't cross the line until the last polls submitted their numbers in. I was below the line, and 7 over the line, and then done.
Okay.
So the call
there you have it, panel. There you have it. It can be done.
It can be done, yes. So we've got 2 years here in BC to get organized. So you need to decide, you need to make that decision and build your team. And the team is just as important as the candidate, as we've had ample talk about that this evening, how important it is to have that team behind you through your campaign and through your term, and to carry you forward. You can't just abandon folks that we're putting forward to make these great personal sacrifices. So keep showing up for them, keep reading their emails, keep sending them money, send them money, send money, send money. Tony's got a campaign going now, send Toni money. So I just want to thank our sponsors at SFU, and I want to remind everybody that there are 2 more panels coming up, so make sure to follow Women Transforming Cities on Facebook and Instagram to make sure that you are in the know as to when these next events are coming up, and get on those mailing lists, open the emails, read them, and get informed and stay informed. We've got 1 more closing poll, just a quick survey question on some actions you might take after listening to all of these inspiration things today, what ideas have been planted in your head, and what you might need to water them and grow. And then I believe that's a wrap. So just 4 minutes over, that's not too shabby. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to prioritize coming and listening to these important voices today. Thank you, Kristyn. I know it's very late where you are. Appreciate you coming in with your perspective. And Toni, thank you so much for taking pause from your campaign that you're in right now to come and share with all of us. Your wisdom and insights is much appreciated. And I think that's it. So we can probably do a Zoom wave. That's a thing, right? It's not a thing, Zoom wave. And and then I think that looks like most people have answered the poll. There's still a minute left in the poll, and people are trickling on their way out the door. So thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you, Rhiannon, our wonderful moderator, and to Women Transforming City, to Joy, to Ash, to everybody in the background who made this happen. Thank you. And of course, to Mayor Booth and Nadine, who's left us early.
And Nadine, yes, thank you.